Dan Epstein, welcome back to the bookshelf conversation.
Hey, it's nice to be back, Ron. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I wish we were chatting under more pleasant circumstances, but this is going to be a bit unusual for the bookshelf because we're not talking about my guests' projects, but the
Or books
passing
at all?
of an acting icon. James Earl Jones passed away a couple of days ago, and if you look on social media, for me, I think the majority of the things I've seen all reference his baseball movies, uh, Field of Dreams, The Sandlot, to which we were both a little surprised to see that there was a sequel to The Sandlot 2. There was, of course, Bingo Long, the Traveling All Stars and Motor Kings, and on in the theater, he was in Fences.
Right.
So, uh, so
Yeah,
what
I
was
mean,
your reaction?
it was pretty much baseball or Star Wars seemed to be
Right,
the
right.
social media reference points. But I mean, yeah, he had a really long and quite varied career, but it is interesting that he's, so associated with baseball and like you say, largely through those films and Fences. And it's interesting because by all accounts, he was not a baseball fan. And the scene in Field of Dreams where they're watching the game at Fenway Park, that supposedly was the first Major League Baseball game that James Earl Jones had ever attended, and he
Wow.
would have he would have been in his late 50s at that point. So clearly not a man who was into baseball.
Which is kind of surprising. I was doing some comparisons of actors who've appeared in multiple baseball movies, and you have, of course, Kevin Costner, who was in Field of Dreams, obviously. He was also in Bull Durham, where he played a catcher, and For the Love of the Game, where he played a pitcher. So I thought that was kind of interesting that he was able to carry that off. Dennis Haysbert was in Major League and its subsequent movies, and also Mr. Baseball with
Right.
Tom Selleck, and he looked pretty good in those roles. And of course, in Bingo Long, James Earl Jones played the I guess Josh Gibson type of player, whereas
Right.
Billy D. Williams was the Satchel Paige. Uh, and as baseball movies have grown or become more recent and more realistic, you can't get away with looking bad on the field,
Right.
as Anthony Perkins did in Fear Strikes Out or
Right. Or
William
William
Bennick in the Babe
Bendix.
Ruth story. You can't get away with that anymore.
Yeah.
But I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of baseball action with the stars of that movie, except in close-ups. So I guess it's relatively easy to get away with not being like an all-star player. But I'm surprised you mentioned that he wasn't a big baseball fan because I'm so naive that I think when an actor goes into a role like that, he immerses himself in the role in athletic movies and whatever sport he's participating in. I was very disappointed to hear an interview with Alan Tudyk, who played Ben Chapman in 42, that he was not a baseball person. He didn't really know anything about Chapman. I was kind of disappointed in that. But
Yeah. Well, but I think there's a couple things, with of the baseball films that James Earl Jones was in, Bingo Long is far and away my favorite, and I think he had such a physicality that really it was believable that he was a catcher because he's this big guy and he's has this very kind of um, charismatic, but like it's sort of a leader vibe where it's like okay, you could see this guy calling a game, and kind of taking control of the game, and the scene where he's I think there's only like two or three scenes where he's actually at the plate, and it's a fairly convincing swing he has and stance. I mean, it's very pre-World War II, and that sort of like holding the bat like this. But that's, that was what the movie called for. So clearly he had done some research and, probably looked at old films and, how the players held the bat. And but yeah, he's completely convincing as a ball player. And again, I mean, it kind of blew my mind when he passed to learn that he was 93, which would have made him 45, about 44, 45 when he was filming Bingo Long, and he definitely does. He looks much younger, and again, like you completely believe that he could go out and catch 9 innings behind the plate, and also, put a couple of balls over the fence in the process.
Now, more recent movies again will usually have a consultant, a baseball consultant, or a trainer who will work with the players to make them more believable. I remember reading about that kind of thing with Chad Bosman, if I'm blanking on his first name, in 42, how he was under the tutelage of base running coaches
Right.
to make his action more believable. I don't know if this Being Along was done in the mid early 70s. Is
Yeah,
that
it came out in 1976.
so? I'm wondering if they had that kind of backup support
Well,
then.
yeah, I don't know that it was specifically like that. I know that there were a lot of former Negro League players involved in the film. And then there was also Leon Wagner, who had been a Major League ball player for the Angels and a couple of other teams in the 60s. He's one of the all-stars. And so you definitely had the sense that whoever was putting it together knew what they were doing, knew the right people to pull in, and there was probably some, what was it, John Badham who directed it? That there were, and Badham was a baseball fan and had actually grown up going to Negro League games in Alabama. So yeah, they they clearly weren't half-assing it.
Now that you mention it, so Being Along was obviously the Negro Leagues. Fences was about an ex Negro League player who was just on the cusp and was not able to get into the major leagues. And The Sandlot, he played an old Negro League player who was familiar with Babe Ruth, who was on
Right.
good terms with Babe Ruth, according to my memory. Uh, and I think he played the elder statesman, the retired player, quite well. Of course, in Fences, he was quite bitter about the
Right.
circumstances of his career. Didn't seem as much in The Sandlot. Now, you had told me that you did not, that Field of Dreams was not your favorite movie. So, why is that, if I can press?
Oh, I mean, how much time do you have? I mean, I feel like to break it down, I mean, it's an incredibly cloying, emotionally obvious piece of middle-aged male wish fulfillment. Actually, the book's even worse. But there's so many things wrong with Field of Dreams. I mean, shoeless Joe Jackson batting from the right hand side of the plate is just the beginning. But
And that
I feel
accent, the
like,
accent that he had was not
oh
Southern
God,
accent.
it's so, and and I know a lot of people love it, and a lot of people are like, oh, but my dad and I, we play, it's like, okay, if this is cheap therapy for you, great. But I just, it's just a painful movie, from so many perspectives. But I think, casting casting James Earl Jones in that film was really a masterstroke, because I think he's really the only people, after in the wake of his passing, a lot of people are talking about, oh, his speech about the importance of baseball and Field of Dreams, like it's the greatest cinematic baseball speech ever. It's cornball bullshit, but he delivers it with such, I mean, like such um, charisma and um, such weightiness that like you buy it coming from him because but this is also a man who could read your grocery list and make it sound heavy and of import. So I think he's far and away the best thing about Field of Dreams, and which I feel like was the case with so many of the films that he was in throughout his career. Like he was not always, able to work in, the most top of the line projects, and but whatever he was in, he made better.
You often hear about other actors who audition for the role, and then sometimes you will find video of them making some of the speeches. I couldn't imagine anyone else with that voice, with his voice. I can't hear it coming from anybody else.
Right. I mean, like there, for instance, there's that, Bull Durham, talking about Kevin Costner. Bull Durham is a baseball film I think is, really good for the most part. But the one thing that I really hate about that film is the kind of soliloquy Costner gives to Susan Sarandon about, all the things he loves. And because unlike everything else in that film, that struck me as like a, script writer showing off, like, look what I can do, look what I can. And it just, it doesn't land right for me. But again, if putting that speech in James Earl Jones's mouth would have, I would have teared up.
I wonder if you mentioned how that portion of Field of Dreams where James Earl Jones talks about the importance of baseball, uh, and it's certainly used over and over again when talking about the nostalgia of baseball, the meaning of baseball in America. Uh, I think that's one of the best monologue soliloquies. I'm not versed on the title of these things uh, of any movie. I mean, you can go back to some of the things, some of the speeches from Lincoln, let's say, or a few other things. But because I am enmeshed in baseball as I am, I can't think of too many other speeches and movies that have that recognition.
I don't know. Give me Robert Shaw and Jaws talking about the sinking of what was it, the Indianapolis, and having to fight off the sharks. Like that to me carries way more emotional import than anything from Field of Dreams.
Well, you're obviously not in the tank for Field of Dreams.
Right. Not at all.
So, are you aware of? Have you seen Fences with him in
I did not. I really wish I had.
the movie version? It was Denzel Washington, wasn't it, in that
Right.
role?
I
Right.
believe so. Yeah.
So as I mentioned to you, I'm not a theater person, but once in a while I will go. And one of the first dates I had with my wife was to go see Fences. And again, I mean, he's such a powerful presence that his bravado, his anger, his bitterness over his circumstances was amazing. Uh, I think better than Denzel's because I always feel, with the limited experience I do have in theater, you don't have as many chances to make your point
Right.
live as you would in a theater where they can, shoot it from a different angle and let's do it again, let's try it again like this. In theater, as in sports, you pretty much only have one shot to make it.
Right, and I think James Earl Jones actually considered himself more of a stage actor than a screen actor. I mean, screen was obviously where he made his money, but I think he really was somebody who enjoyed and um, found that a more satisfying experience. I actually, now that I remember it, I did see him on stage once in a play by Athol Fugard called Harold and the Boys. It was like 1983 in New York, and which is a play that takes place in apartheid South Africa. And yeah, it was just to watch him up close doing his thing was a really profound experience.
I said that I don't know why I don't enjoy theater more than I do. Uh, is there anything else you might think of? I know you said he wasn't a baseball fan, but can you think of anything you might have wanted him to see him in a baseball related property?
That's a good question. I mean, as much as I love baseball, I have a hard time with most baseball movies.
Uh-huh.
So I feel like there's, it's like as much as I love music, I have a hard time with most of, dramatized films about rock and roll or stuff because there's so many details that they always get wrong, and there's so many things that are simplified to try to move the story along, or and then you lose all the nuance, and that kind of makes the music or the sport great in the process. So I guess I've never really thought about that and like because I've kind of long ago given up on the idea that like I could see favorite actors in great baseball films. But I would say Bingo Long is if I had to make a top five of all-time favorite baseball films and films where they really you know, got much more correct than incorrect. I would say Bingo Long is in the top five for sure.
But is that kind of fair? Because I mean, as much as I am ingrained in baseball, I'm not an expert like some people. But if I come across a movie or a book where they make a mistake, that kind of like I will recognize a mistake, whereas an average person might not. Same thing
Right.
with you and music and baseball. We recognize these things, and as far as I'm concerned, if I find something on page 5 that's wrong, it kind of colors the rest of the book for me.
Right.
Like right now, I'm reading a historical baseball novel, and it's based in the early 19th. Well, this particular part is in the early 1930s, and they're talking about night games at Yankee Stadium. So, and of course, I go and look it up. I said, when was the first night game at Yankee Stadium? And it was obviously much later. Uh, so I wonder. And then they go on. The author goes on to talk about the World Series in 1932. So I go to baseballreference.com for the play-by-play, and okay, they got that right because
Right.
I was curious, and I'm only about a third of the way through the book, and I don't know what else is going to happen. But yeah, we recognize these things that most people don't, and people will say we're being like petty and picayune.
Well, and yeah, and errors do happen. I've had errors and roll through my legs, and and at least one of my books that fixed in the second edition. But it happens. But I feel like with a film, you have a much you have a much larger team to work with, and somebody should be flagging
Mhm.
these issues, and somebody but I think it kind of works the opposite way. Like it's so unwieldy that people just kind of, or the studio is involved and wants, this kind of film. And so that it makes it harder to get things right somehow. And that's frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's frustrating to have lost someone like James Earl Jones. I've said on a couple of occasions that I have a list of people I would have loved to have interviewed
Oh,
for,
yeah.
for these bookshelf conversations, and I know it's a pipe dream to expect to be able to get someone of his stature on, but I would have loved to have that conversation with him about his role in baseball films. Dan
Well,
Epstein, thank you.
and the thing I just wanted to say is well, 93 years. I mean, I'm sorry we have lost him, but that's a really good run.
Mhm.
And and also by all accounts, I mean, everybody I do know who did meet him, did work with him, things I've read, like just he just sounds like, a wonderful guy and a really very upstanding, like a lot of that kind of gravitas, kind of moral gravitas that he brought to his roles. It seems like that was him. That was not an act. And aside from just being an incredibly talented person, I just feel like, you know, um, I'm sorry we lost him because, we always need more people like him.
Dan Epstein, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ron. Great to see you as always.